All right. Thank you, everybody, for answering our question here to get started. This is a 3-workshop series or 3-webinar series. And today we're going to talk about learning about your land and its potential and a little overview of LandPKS. A week from today, please feel free to come back and you will hear about monitoring vegetation and understanding habitat. And then in 2 weeks, we'll be talking about monitoring soil health. So we hope you'll enjoy this whole series. We will be recording these, and we will have those available on, and we'll send those out to anyone who registered so that you have those available. If you need to miss one, you can still come back to that. So today, for this presentation, we'll talk about what is land potential in the context of the app especially. You'll get an overview of LandPKS, learning about your soil, and that includes identifying your soil as well as ecological site identification and how to access that kind of information. And then Jeff will lead us all through a live demo. A little bit of housekeeping too. If you do have questions, feel free to put those in the chat while we're going through the presentation, and we'll have a time for question and answer towards the end. So land potential is defined as that inherent long-term potential of the land to sustainably generate those ecosystem services. It tells you about the potential production capacity of the land and potential resilience. And most often we think about that being controlled to some degree by soil. So that's one reason why we'll talk a lot about soils today. And we will be talking a lot about the LandPKS mobile app. The mobile app is free to be downloaded, and we sent you a link to do that, but you can find it on either the Apple Store or in the Google Play Store. It has great information on accessing soil, ecological site, and habitat information. It helps you monitor a wide range of things and provides some great reporting features and helps you keep track of management records. And we wanted to start off and just give you that really high-level overview. So there are 6 report modules on the app and 4 input modules. And for the report modules, those that you see with the leaf, LandInfo, vegetation, habitat, and climate, all have information that you can gather before you start to input anything. Just by looking at your GPS location, it can tell you a lot about the climate that you might experience at that area. It can show you some information about how soils have been mapped for that location. It can also tell you a lot about wildlife. And right now, that characteristic is only available in North America, and there are 22 species in it. We are working on expanding that right now, and there'll be more information available for North America in the future within this year. There are the 4 input modules as well. So LandInfo about the soils on your land, and you'll get some information about all these input modules in just a little bit. Land management, soil health, and LandCover. So why would you want to use LandPKS? Well, there's great information linking to, in North America, that would be, or in the US, that would be the Nrcs soil information, but there's also links to global soil databases and ecological site description databases. There's information that helps you improve your land's condition. Knowing what that potential is for your land can really help you think about where am I today and how might I go about improving land condition. For the United States, the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef and the Bureau of Land Management have endorsed using LandPKS for their permittees as well as for ranchers within the U.S. And it's an important tool for adaptive management, and we'll go into that in a little bit more detail. Just to have a testimonial here from one of our colleagues who says, thinking about what's underneath your feet really helps you plan and determine what you're going to do for your rangeland. And then why do adaptive management? I really feel like adaptive management helps us to be much more proactive rather than reactive. It helps you be thoughtful about what might be needed for your land and how you might make improvements. It helps you make better decisions because you're relying on information that you've collected in the field and you understand what's happening on your land. It also provides you with that ability to make management changes quickly by being in tune with what is changing on the land and what you could be improving. And it also helps us test and improve our understanding of the land. Anytime we're monitoring, we're really creating an assumption and testing that assumption. Do I really understand that if I take this management action, my land will change, my vegetation will change in this way? You're testing that assumption. And then by testing it and understanding it and gathering more data, you really do have a better sense and understanding of your land over time. And this is just a really ultra simple adaptive management framework here. But really what it means is that as we said, we're being proactive and thoughtful. We're planning what we're going to do. We then go out and do it, monitor and evaluate, and then adapt. And how can LandPKS help with that? In an adaptive management planning framework, there are various components. We want to understand in inventory, we want to understand what we have on the land, so we want to inventory that land, and LandPKS can help with that in various ways. We want to then understand what the current condition is of those things out there on the land, the plants, animals, the soil, and LandPKS can help with that part as well. Once you understand the current condition of the land and its biological components, you can also understand about the infrastructure and the limitations on the land, and then start to set up short-term and long-term goals, making those as measurable as possible, identify any of those obstacles that might be in your way, and management actions, and then do monitoring to see whether your actions are sending you in the right direction or not. So again, LandPKS can really help with inventory assessment and with that monitoring component. All right, I'm now going to turn the presentation over to Jeff.
So we've basically got two tabs, the report tab and a data input tab on the app. And in the report tab, as soon as you've entered a GPS location, either by using the GPS on the phone or entering your own coordinates, or down here at the bottom, the map, selecting a location, if you have an internet connection, it will bring up a list of soils that are ranked based on your location. So the most likely is listed first, just based on the soil map, but then there are a number of other soils that are listed. And it could well be that the point that you're sitting on is one of those other soils, and that's why we include those. So soil maps basically present groups of soils that have been identified in the area. But to figure out which soil you're on, you really need to dig a hole and do a little bit of additional exploration. Next slide, please. So we go from these map soils, and you can then link through when you click on the names of the soils, and it will bring up this additional information here. If you're in the United States, it brings up information from the Nrcs. If you're international, it will bring up information from the FAO Global Soil Map, and in the future, the digital soil map, including the one developed by ISRIC. And then if you're in the United States and you happen to be in rangeland currently, there should be a link to an ecological site description, and that will then take you through to edit. Now, these are actually the two things that are required where an internet connection is required. We need an internet connection to initially download the soils information, and then it persists on your phone. But then we also need an internet connection to access the ecological site information, because you're essentially going out to a separate website. The other thing, obviously, that we need an internet connection for is if you want to update your information to then re-predict those soils. So based on the data that you've entered, we can actually provide you with a better prediction, but that requires an internet connection to connect to the cloud. But all the data collection etc., can be done offline. You can create plots offline, etc. Next, please. So a new feature, which we'll go into more detail during our next session next week, is learning about habitat on your land. And essentially what this is doing is taking your location, querying a database, geospatial database, that asks the question, does this species even occur in this area? Not does it occur on my specific piece of land, because of course we don't know that, but does it in fact occur in this area? Based on that, it will bring up a list of species that may occur on your land. It also then provides some information on what those species requirements are. So the shrub cover, grass cover, vegetation height, land cover, etc. And then the third column in this table is your own data. So if you've collected data using LandPKS for that location, it will populate that table so that you can make your own comparisons between your own data and the habitat requirements for that particular species. So again, come back on March 9th to learn more about this particular feature and about the vegetation data collection tools in general that we have on LandPKS. Next, please. So we can then, of course, input data on the current condition of land, plants, and soil, as I indicated under the data input tab at the top here. We click on that. And we've got the soil information up in the top under LandInfo. Land management, we can keep track of our management practices there, including precipitation, as well as management. And then soil health, which has just come out with an expanded version. Land cover, looking at vegetation, and then obviously photos and notes. And importantly, down here at the bottom, at any time you can choose to make your data private. If you make your data private, they will not appear on the public website. We do encourage you, if you don't have any particular privacy concerns, to leave that unchecked, because it allows then your data to actually be used by others to improve maps and predictions throughout the country and throughout the world. Next, please. So these 4 input modules that I just indicated, LandInfo for obtaining that site-specific soil ID and accessing soil information, land management if you'd like to, and again, these are all optional. You can use one or all of them. And then our monitoring modules for both soil health and land cover. And the soil health indicators can be used on both cropland and rangeland as well as forest. Next, please. So here, the LandInfo module, land use, slope, soil limitations, soil texture and color. I'll run through that in a minute. Next, please. Land management module, a variety of different inputs that you can explore on your own. Just open the app and start clicking around. You can't break anything. If it freezes up like any app, you just close it and reopen it again. Next, please. Soil health module includes a wide variety now of soil health indicators. We've basically replicated the Nrcs Cropland Infield Soil Health Assessment Protocol. That's a mouthful. But basically a new protocol that Nrcs has come up with for croplands. Again, we're talking about soil. These are relevant on all lands. But we have added some additional ones that are particularly relevant on rangelands that weren't included in the Nrcs Cropland protocol related to runoff and erosion. Next, please. And finally, the land cover module, which is basically a rapid way to collect land cover data. The data are collected using a yardstick or meter stick that has 5 points marked on it. We drop the stick 20 times and we get 100 points. And obviously we're not going to the species level here, but the data are comparable with the data from AIM and NRI for those that are familiar with those protocols. So basically, if you get a 10% bare ground with LandPKS, you'll get a 10% bare ground if you use the AIM or NRI protocol. Next, please. So what's new? We've got an expanded new soil health module coming up. New info indicators on the report screen, as Terry pointed out, with that little leaf that tells you where you've got some information that's popped up. Sometimes it doesn't load right away. It takes a little while for things to load. So when you do have new information, you'll see the leaf popping up. Land cover and trends imagery in sites. So basically we're giving you access to NDVI processed data for your location. So instead of having to go online and find that, it will actually bring up the imagery for your location. And that's under the vegetation report. And we're currently working on development of a utilization module. All right, so basically what I did was I tapped on the plus button and it has gotten my location, but alternatively, if I'd like to, I can go in and edit that manually if I've got my own GPS. I can also go down here to the map, and on the map at the bottom of the screen, I can, it will bring up a map. I can basically navigate any place in the world. And I'm going to go ahead and stay here in the Mesilla Valley, create one right here. If I'd like to, if I don't want to create a plot, I can actually just view the soil information here, view soil ID or the climate information, but I'm going to go ahead and create a LandPKS plot. We'll give it a name. And I'm going to leave that unlocked, but again, if you'd like to lock it, you can hit the privacy button and press save. And what it's doing now is it's actually going to the cloud. It's predicting the soils based on my location and based on where I am within the soil map. Okay, so it's not just what soil map unit I'm in, which is what the other applications will provide, but actually predicting. If I'm really near the boundary of the soil map, it's going to bring up additional. And you can see here, I've got a number of leaves. LandInfo, vegetation, and habitat all have some information. When I tap on LandInfo, it brings up that list of soils. And again, the first thing I want to do is I actually want to look at this list of soils and see how different they are from each other. The stipples indicate how much sand I have, and the gray indicates how much clay is in the soil. So here up at the top, I've got a loam on the top layer of the Glendale. It goes down to 47 inches deep. I currently have my phone set to English units. I could switch it to metric. And if I scroll across here, you can see that I've got some pretty sandy soils. And I've also got some down here that have an awful lot of clay. Now we're in an alluvial plain here in the Rio Grande Valley, and the soils are quite diverse, and you actually don't know what soil you're on until you dig a hole. Now, if I were someplace else, say out in the middle of the salt flats in the Mojave Desert, those soils are pretty uniform. And in that case, I might just decide, I trust the map. There clearly isn't much soil variability in this area. I can see it's all pretty uniform, and I'm not going to bother digging a hole. But here in the Mesilla Valley, the soils are really diverse, and the implications of not knowing what your soil are pretty high, because the way we irrigate varies quite a bit depending on which soil we're on. So I've also got information in vegetation and habitat. We'll go over the rest of that in the next webinar, but you're welcome to explore it on your own in the meantime. So I'm going to switch now over to data input and explore that section that specifically focuses on land potential, on those factors that determine what the potential of your land is. Some of these are just descriptive. Obviously, land use, describing your land cover and grazing and so forth, that may not be that important for you to record. And obviously for grazing, there are much more sophisticated apps for keeping track of grazing. This is basically just saying what happens to be on your land. Slope, however, is super important to document in terms of determining what the potential of your land is. We can use these pictures here, and we actually find that that a lot of folks are really good at using these pictures. In fact, sometimes better than using the slope meter. If you click on the slope meter, it basically brings up, and you can't actually see me rotating the phone, and it's not rotating on the screen in front of you, but it's basically going to rotate, and it's going to allow you to determine the slope. Now that's 115% slope. That's something it's hard to even stand on. So clearly I've made an error. I should probably go back to just using my pictures. Slope shape. And again, all you're doing is just holding the phone up along the slope. Slope shape, I'm going to look down the slope and across the slope. Slope shape determines how water flows across the landscape and where it accumulates. The most productive parts of most landscapes, anywhere that there's any runoff occurring at all, tend to be where you are in a convex slope looking down the slope and a convex slope looking across the slope. And again, it's not just because water is accumulating there, but historically soil tends to have accumulated there. So that's where your deep soils are. And often if there's been erosion of organic matter from upslope, you have a lot more organic matter that's accumulated in those soils. They tend to be very productive soils. So big factor in determining the potential of your land. The next one is soil texture. And this, in addition to slope and color to some extent, is what we use to determine the identify your soil, which from among those various soils it is. So again, in this case, I'm using inches. If I'd like to switch to metric, I go to more down in the lower right, and I can go to application settings. I can switch the units to metric if I'd like. I'll just leave them in English for now. I could change the language to one of our other languages. The app is nearly fully translated in Spanish. The other languages are not all of the app is translated in. And then for soil color, I want to be very careful to tell it what the reference is I'm going to use. And I'm going to show you soil color in a minute. And I'm actually going to be using a yellow Post-it note for this. The YVAL card is even more accurate if you have access to one of those. That's a gray card that photographers use. Okay. And so now I'm back into my test and back into data input, and I go to texture. I'm still on English units, and basically I can select one of these textures, or if I'm not sure, I can tap Guide Me. And Guide Me takes me essentially to a key, and I can answer the questions in that key. And if I'm not sure what they mean, I can actually tap on the question mark, and it will bring up on your phone, and not while I'm live demoing, it will actually bring up a short video. And you can see, or in this case, a picture. So a short video or a picture showing you how to answer those questions. So in this case, I've got a less than 1 inch ribbon, pressing it between my forefinger and my thumb. The soil feels gritty, and it's telling me that I have a sandy loam. So I say use that texture. I indicate what the rock fragment content is, and I go on to the next step. And I can do this for a variety of depths. And in fact, you don't have to necessarily do all the depths. And if you're in a tilled field, obviously the 0 to 1/2 inch and 1/2 to 4 inch is probably going to be the same. And so I'm going to just go ahead and fill in a few here. I'll put a sandy loam in, and a loamy sand, and we'll go with another loamy sand here. So now when I go back, based on that information alone, and I'm going to go ahead and correct that slope to what it actually is in this area, so we get a decent prediction. If I now hit synchronize, what it's going to do is send my data to the cloud. It's going to run an algorithm, and it's going to repredict. If I go to report and I go to LandInfo, and you can see there was a leaf there, which means there's new information on that tab. So the most probable one, just based on my location, if I were just to take what the soil map tells me, it's a Glendale.
Hello?
But if I use the GPS plus the data, for the data, I actually get a completely different soil. And in fact, one that wasn't even initially ranked in the first ranking. So it basically went out there with the algorithm, looked at all the soils in the area and said, you know, based on this, the most similar is a Harkey. And again, a Harkey is different from a Glendale. It has different characteristics. It's still on floodplains. Obviously, I'm on a floodplain, but I can link directly through then to that ecological site. And again, when I link through to the ecological site, there's a huge amount of information. Now, where I am in the valley in Las Cruces right now is primarily used for cultivated and irrigated agriculture. But it could well be, when we run out of water here, turn back into rangeland. And then I'm going to want to access this information. So this shows this ecological site is mapped in southern New Mexico. Tells me what some of the related sites are, the dominant plant species. And I can download the full description here at the bottom if I'd like. I can also tab through to the various sections. So there's information on the physiographic features, the climate, soil features, ecological dynamics of this site. There's a state and transition model there for those of you that are working on rangelands, etc. I can close that. And now I'm going to go back to data input. And you'll see there's additional information that I can add. So I can add, for example, soil limitations, describing what the limitations might be for your land. There will be some, this is actually used internationally then to predict the land capability class. In the United States, we predict the land capability class for each soil. Nrcs has already done that. But basically you can answer a set of questions there. And then finally, soil color. And I'm going to use record soil color using the camera. And essentially what I'm going to do is take a 3M yellow Post-it note. Make sure you do use 3M if you're going to use this, this particular selection. If you'd like to use a different one, you can send it to us and we can try to get that the data for that so that you have the appropriate color reference in your phone. And essentially what I'm going to do here is just tap start and take a photograph of my desk here in this case. And I'm going to say use the photo. I've made sure that I've got the surface very smooth, so pat down the soil. And the card is illuminated exactly the same way that the soil is. I hit save, and it tells me my Munsell color for those that have used a Munsell soil color book, a 5YR 5bar9, which is about right. This is a pretty reddish desk, and that's a pretty good prediction. You do want even light. Make sure that things are really flat, and we found that we can get as good a predictions as we can with other tools. And again, that will go into the prediction. So with that, I am going to stop my share and I think turn it over to Carolyn to lead us through the questions.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. And thanks everyone for your questions. We've already received a few. If anybody else has questions, please throw them into the chat so we can discuss them. The first question is from Leslie, and it's about the degree of precision that you get from entering lat long versus using the GPS. Could you say something about that?
So it does provide decimal degrees. I mean, it basically is, it's the precision on your phone, and it will tell you what the precision is when you're using the GPS on your phone. So just like with anything else, if you've got access to wireless networks, it's going to be pretty precise. If you're using the GPS alone, it won't be as precise.
The next question is from Jim. He was curious about why to monitor or document soil smell.
That's a good question. So it turns out that soil smell is an incredibly sensitive indicator of the health of the soil, and more importantly, what we call the redox potential, or how saturated the soil is. And so if you've got a soil that has been saturated for a long time, it stinks, or at least most humans think that it stinks. And basically that means that the organic matter is probably not cycling really well. That's how we get mammals that are stuck and basically haven't decomposed. You bury them in an anaerobic environment. Similarly, if the soil has no smell at all, it indicates that there's very little biological activity occurring. So most of us humans probably wouldn't use soil smell as a monitoring tool, but it can be a useful assessment tool. Now, having said that, if you go and you get a chef out with you in the field and you bring them out every year for 10 years, I'll bet you that they can tell you whether there's been a change in the soil smell. And if we then get that chef together with a soil scientist, I'll bet we could get some pretty good soil biological monitoring going on. But I don't know any really good chefs, and I'm certainly not. So I think probably just leave it as an assessment tool. Good question. Thanks.
So the next question is from Anya. How well do the soil modules and the user data algorithms work in areas where there are major soil mapping gaps?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's an issue that we've got in the United States for sure. If the soils have not been mapped at all, the algorithms don't work. The good news is that the app itself can be used to gather data about the soil that can in fact be used to inform management. So just getting texture by depth, just getting some of your soil color information. One of the things I didn't show is that if you enter the data for the top 20 centimeters or top 20 inches, it will actually give you your plant available water holding capacity. It calculates it on the phone. It'll give you your potential infiltration capacity. And you can play around with what the impacts of changing soil organic matter are on water holding capacity and infiltration capacity. So even someplace that you don't have good soil maps or any soil maps, you can start to collect some information.
We have a question from Christine about how LandPKS integrates other grazing management apps, or if that's something that maybe we'll do in the future.
So it's currently not integrated with any other grazing management apps, but that is certainly something that could be done. And something else that could be done is you could potentially integrate parts of it. So there are a lot of an increasing, I shouldn't say a lot, but an increasing number of really powerful grazing management apps out there and tools. And one of the things that most of them lack, in fact, I think all of them lack, is the ability to go out and actually confirm what ecological site you're on, which is obviously a really important piece of information when you're managing livestock and forage production and restoration of rangelands. And so we do have an API. So if you collect data using the, which is an application programming interface, if you collect data using LandPKS, those other apps could actually set up a pipeline to automatically ingest the information from the LandPKS. And that's certainly something we'd be more than happy to discuss with other groups. I would also add that right now, speaking of other apps, every app has some sort of a login requirement. We are currently discussing the possibility of eliminating the login requirement for some of the functions, because you actually don't need it to do things like determine your soil texture.
How can we link the different soil depth ranges set in LandPKS with soil layers? In other words, how did you set the ranges for soil depths in LandPKS?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we spent literally months talking with various groups around the world. Everybody has different sort of default depths that they use, and we came up with these based on the best consensus we could come up with. It turns out that for the soil identification, it doesn't really matter. We disaggregate all the data that you provide through the app to 1 centimeter increments, regardless of whether you're using English or metric. We disaggregate everything to 1 centimeter increments, and then we disaggregate all the soil layers that have been described in the soil maps to 1 centimeter increments. And we basically just crosswalk at each of those 1 centimeter depths, and then we pull it back together again.
We have a question from Dusty. Are there any PII concerns about collecting data for agency use?
So the only PII concerns would be if you are on private land, you absolutely want to make sure that you have permission to collect, or really any non-federal land. Make sure that you have permission to collect data on that land. So it's not a PII issue so much as just a data issue. And obviously you are, the data are linked to a particular location. And if that location happens to be private land, then you want to be very sensitive to that. And I think, again, soils data are somewhat unique because they're already public, including on private lands. We've already mapped, we've already predicted. There are more and more increasingly precise soil maps coming out that are based on digital predictions that are down to even as small as, basically the size of a baseball diamond. So the individual diamond is mapped uniquely, and it's something that is viewed as a public good, public access, and so forth. But still, if you go out and collect data on this private land, you want to be very sensitive to that, and that's one of the reasons we set up the privacy function that wasn't originally available.
Jeff, could you just tell people what PII stands for? Because some of us don't work with agencies.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Yeah, it's something that those of us in federal government deal with all the time. Personally identifiable information. Basically anything that can be tied to you that is not clearly publicly available. And even a lot of things that are clearly publicly available are viewed by the federal government as PII.
We have another question, this time from Hans-Peter. Could you show a bit on land management and land conservation measures that are practiced on the site where information is collected?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's really a two-part question, I think, coming from the individual asking it. One is, we're actually going to provide access to additional knowledge and information about sustainable land management practices through something called the WOCAT database. So for those of you from the United States, this is like conservation practices, the conservation practices that Nrcs has, but that have been developed internationally in a global database. So everything from ridge tillage to runoff water collecting pits, to sort of gully treatments and so forth. The app itself allows you to collect some of the information about land conservation measurements or land conservation measures in the basically in the management module, and you can do some documentation of that, and obviously you can take photos, and we hope to upgrade the photo feature as well so that there's a little more flexibility, but you've already got 4 landscape photos in there.
Jeff, there's a question about whether it works in Canada.
Yes, it works in Canada. It works in all countries in the world, including Canada. And we've actually had a couple of Canada-specific webinars that I think one of them might be up on our webpage. If not, we can send you a link to that. It absolutely does. Now, one of the things it doesn't do in Canada is it doesn't link directly to your own soil survey. So we haven't had, it's basically linking to the FAO, so the global one, and the global soil map is essentially pulling data from Canada's soil survey, but it's then generalizing it. So you're not getting as precise soil information as you would by going directly to the Canadian one. The other thing is there is actually a fair bit of information for those of you that are right on the border. We found this with Mexico as well. We've done a lot of work, cross-border collaboration, working with our friends and colleagues just across the border here from Las Cruces. So there's a lot of information that can be shared because obviously the soils know no borders, and management doesn't either.
So there are a couple questions about doing a soil test, the easiest procedure or how accurate they are.
Yeah, that's a really good question. This is something we've really focused on. So one of the reasons we've really focused on observable soil indicators. So the third webinar, we're going to focus on soil health. And we've really tried to focus on those indicators that you can observe in the field for which you do not need a laboratory test, and you can learn a tremendous amount. And in fact, for some properties, you can learn more from observing your soil than you can from measuring your soil. Now, if you want to document changes over time, you generally need measurements.
Thank you all for coming, and we'll continue to stay here for a few more minutes and answer questions if we have them, but really appreciate everybody's attention and great questions.
Yeah, the answer to the Nrcs question, I think, is we probably wouldn't load it directly into Nrcs, but we will be including it in something called the Landscape Data Commons that's been developed by the Jornada. And it will then, we hope in the future, become publicly accessible through the Landscape Data Commons. However, we have the data from LandPKS have already been used to improve digital soil maps in Africa. And Nrcs has indicated an interest in using the data to improve some of the soil maps in the United States. And again, I'm not saying it wouldn't eventually be included in some form of Nrcs, which is our National Soil Information System. But I think we just want to be very careful that we don't imply the quality of the data that's being contributed through LandPKS is the same as the quality of data that was collected by professional soil scientists, although it can be very good.
Any other questions out there? Actually, there's one here, Jeff, about further information about the use of application for soil information and how to identify the ecology.
Sure, yeah. So it really, the way it relates to ecology is really your soil determines what sort of plant community can exist in that location. I'm sure you already know that. And I'm basically LandPKS helps you determine what that soil is. So an awful lot of ecologists, and I started off with a degree in biology, focusing on ecology, and we weren't really trained in soils, and a lot of biologists and ecologists aren't. And so this basically provides a relatively simple way for anyone, regardless of their training, to learn about their soils as a basis for understanding what the potential plant communities and therefore the potential animal communities might be at a location. Thank you.
Well, thank you everybody for calling in. We're going to end the webinar now and hope to see many of you again next week.